Video 3. So you have formed a team in your congregation. You have learned about your community. What do you do now? This video focuses on partnership and prioritization. It's the impulse of most churches and most nonprofit ministries to do it on your own. To say that whatever your kind of ministry you're going to do, you don't need anybody else. But that's not true in the arena of social transformation. You can't do collective action for collective benefit without doing collective action. And that requires a collective. It requires people coming together and making common decisions. So if your church or your ministry runs everything, it won't be collective action, and you won't end up with the kind of collective benefit that you're seeking for. You won't end up with the common good. So what you have to do if you want to transform your community is you have to join, start, or improve a coalition. A coalition is a vehicle for the transformation of your community that is profoundly democratic. Now, ideally, you want to join a coalition, but you want to participate in that coalition in a way that is deeply rooted in your faith. But you will find your way to that in the process of working with the coalition. The first step is just to come as a servant, to come humbly, and to join the coalition. Now, there are places where there aren't the kinds of coalitions that you would want to join, and then you need to start one. It's also possible that you'll find a coalition that isn't doing all that you're learning to do in this class, and then you probably want to join it and then try to improve it. Now, there are various kinds of coalitions that you can join, start, or improve. I'm going to give you the main categories. You can start, join, or improve a community development corporation, which is a form of asset-based neighborhood planning. Now, community development corporations usually do community development, right? That they pool resources. John McKnight, in the chapter that you read from the Minkler book, talks about community development corporations as focused on economic development, which is a little odd because he actually knows better than that they're not, they're focused on the whole range of neighborhood planning, which includes economic development, but certainly isn't limited to that. Community development corporations are, while they are focused on pooling resources, they do sometimes back into systems change in that they begin to develop relationships with government systems and sometimes even corporate systems. Those relationships tend to be collaborative rather than confrontational. They always look for a way to collaborate first and foremost and avoid confrontation, but they still do end up sometimes changing systems. So community development corporations are one option for a vehicle for profoundly democratic coalition building. The next kind of coalition that you might want to be part of is an issue-based coalition. These are people who come together to solve a problem or realize a vision. It's a specific problem or a specific vision. Now, I wrote here issue-based organization, and that's because it's important to understand that there needs to be some kind of formal vehicle that holds the coalition together, and that's an organization. But it's not the difference between a typical nonprofit organization and a coalition, of course, is this level of profound democracy. How involved are the participants in making the decisions? In a typical nonprofit, it's the board that makes the decisions. In these coalition organizations, there isn't an organization, but the people who are in the coalition, individuals or organizations that make up the coalition, are the ones making the decision. So an issue-based I'm going to give you an example of each of these. A multi-issue organization takes on a number of different problems or visions because its goal is not only connected to those specific problems or visions. At the same time, they want to build an ongoing network where the leaders grow in their power, their common power, and their voice. So the leaders grow and the capacity of the organization is strengthened over time. So, you might be going to see your city council representatives about the needs of the elderly, and then later you're going to come see them about the needs of young people, but they're going to get to know you and you're going to get better and better at influencing them. So that's how a multi-issue organization is about a number of issues, but they're always about building power and voice. Then the last kind of organization, or last kind of coalition effort that I want to talk to you about is a relatively new development in the field, and they are called tables. And they are loose networks for dialogue and strategic collaboration. I'm going to give you an example of each of these. So Templo Calvario is a large, mostly immigrant church in Santa Ana, California, and they have a community development corporation. The leadership of the community development corporation, even though, remember, Templo Calvario has the organization that is the vehicle, but within that vehicle, it is led by a coalition. And the coalition is called the Kingdom Group. And it's a number of different pastors of different congregations that come together, that have a commitment to listen to the people in their congregations and in their neighborhoods, and to make spaces for listening, so that they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in their community, and all the projects that the Community Development Corporation does come out of that listening process. So here's a few of the projects that have come out of that listening process. There's a Santa Ana Parent Project, and that project it offers training for parents. It works in collaboration with the schools. So there are 13 different sites at the most recent point, the point at which I knew about it. There were 13 different sites where they were training parents. And they had a variety of different churches and organizations involved in the training process. Now remember that schools are what John McKnight refers to as a secondary level. Remember, he has 3 levels. He has assets that are owned by the community and are in the community. And then he has assets that are in the community but not owned by the community. And then he has assets that are outside the community and also not owned by the community. So Santa Ana Parent Project is level 2 because it's people that are in the community bringing their own assets, but they're also working with the schools, an organization that is in the community but in many ways run from outside. But they have this partnership. They also have a project called Banking on Our Youth, which helps create internships for youth at risk and youth that don't have a lot of opportunities. The Edward B. Cole Academy is a charter school, and Seguro Financial is a program for incubating small businesses and financial literacy. And all of those programs are created engaging the capacities of local people in the community and also meeting the needs that have been defined by local people in the community. And the Kingdom Group are involved in all of the decision making. Interfaith Power and Light is an example of an issue-based organization. And remember, it's an organization and it's a coalition. So it's a network of congregations, and their concern is the environment or the creation. So they educate congregations about the environment and about environmental issues. They help congregations go green, and they advocate for local, state, and national policies. Now, all the policies that they advocate for are related in some way to the environment, but local chapters decide exactly what policies they're going to advocate for and how they're going to advocate for them. And there is a little bit of a dance because there are state and national policies that they advocate for as well, and not all local coalitions may join in on the same state or national policies. LA Voice is a local affiliate of Faith in Action, which is a national community organizing network based on the Alinsky model, but in many ways more creative and more faith-rooted in most places in the country than most Alinsky model networks are. It is a network of congregations and organizations, although primarily congregations. Some of the issues that LA Voice works on are immigration, healthcare, homelessness, and housing. And LA Voice does community education and advocacy. So they do grassroots organizing. When they come together, they then organize their communities, and they then advocate for objectives connected to immigration, healthcare, homelessness, and housing. The Evangelical Immigration Table is a table. So it's a coalition of individuals and organizations. All of them identify as evangelicals. They're focused on immigration, so that would be an issue-based organization, right? Except that they don't have a common set of policy goals. They don't even have a common set of projects. They come together around principles. They come together around the principle, for example, of family unity, that our immigration policy should support family unity. And they do advocate. They go together to meet with congressional leaders, but when they are together, they push common principles like family unity, but they may share policies that differ. So there's room to have differences, to say, we're all here, Senator, to call you to work for and vote for immigration policies that support family unity. Some of us believe it looks like this, and some of us believe it looks like that. So you can disagree on particular policies, but you are pushing for the implementation of the principle. Not everyone on the table agrees on everything, but they're committed to dialogue. They're committed to an ongoing reflection on the principles, on particular policies in the light of the principles. And so they do convince each other quite often. Like they start off very removed from each other, and then over time they get closer. They also have joint activities that are participated in strategically. So you could have 20 members of 20 organizations at the table, and 6 of them may do an activity together. One of them starts an activity and says, would you like to be part of the planning and execution of this activity? And 5 other organizations may say yes, and nobody else may join in on that particular activity. So these are all different kinds of coalitions that allow for community transformation at the level that we seek when we talk about collective action for collective benefit. So how do these organizations prioritize objectives? The phrase that you're reading about in Lee Staples' chapter, which is a phrase that's used throughout the traditional community organizing world, is cutting issues. And in that parlance, issues mean a particular area of change that you're working on, because problems are multifaceted. You can't address a problem. Think about the problem of poverty. It's too big, right? How do you address the problem of poverty? You have to figure out a particular area of the problem of poverty that you want to address, and that by addressing, you will move towards a solution of the whole. So you can't solve the whole problem, but you can work on a particular piece of it that has a pivotal quality to it, that has more power than just fixing that particular piece. It actually moves the whole forward. So it is an art and a science to figure out what that is. And of course, it includes determining objectives. So you have to look at a particular area of the issue that you want to work on, and then you have to determine measurable, achievable, short-term objectives that lead towards larger goals. Now, whichever kind of coalition you create, of the four that we've talked about, your objectives or your issues and your objectives have to have depth and breadth. What that means is that they have to affect many people, because otherwise you're not going to get enough people involved to win. So they have to affect many people, and they have to affect many people passionately. So one of the problems with immigration is that it doesn't actually affect enough people deeply enough for them to be passionate about it. And we'll talk later as we go on through this course about the particular role of the church in responding to issues that involve needing to care passionately about things that don't affect you personally. So we'll talk about that later. But really, you need to identify issues and objectives that are deep and broad. And part of why you have to do this is that you're not only trying to win that particular issue. Any large social problem that you want to solve, any large social vision of abundant life that you want to achieve will require the growth of individuals in their commitment and capacity and connection, and it will require the growth of the coalition in its commitment, capacity, and connection. So you have to be working on something that affects many people and affects them passionately for them to stay around long enough so that you can strengthen their commitment, capacity, and connection. Warren Hagstrom uses the phrase organizational mileage for describing what the growth of an organization's capacity looks like over time. Adrienne Maree Brown and the movement that she's part of, a very 21st century movement, brings a whole other dimension to this question, because she says that if you don't do community building in the process, you won't in the end build a community of people with commitment, capacity, and connection. So she says you have to judge your issues and your objectives by whether or not they build community as you do them. So you have to make sure, for example, Adrienne Maree Brown would say, that they're truly inclusive, that whatever issue you pick is truly inclusive, not only to get the maximum number of people involved, but because that's the kind of community you want to build in the end. So that even if there are, even if it's only certain people are deeply affected, that you want to build the kind of effort where everybody is connected to what is hurting certain people more than others. So that's, as you read Adrienne Maree Brown, even the way that she writes is indicative of this new way of seeing. Now, when you cut issues, when you articulate objectives, you don't do it once and for all. There is a reflection action cycle in all community transformation. So this week we're talking about where to start, but the fact is you don't just start and stop. It's not linear. It doesn't go from start to stop. You start at a certain point and you go for a certain objective, and then in the process, as you achieve that objective, you then come back and you reflect and you understand the next step in moving towards a solution of the problem or an achievement or the realization of the vision. So the vision clarifies over time. So I'm going to give you a very simple example. They used to call Faith in Action, when it was named PICO, the Stop Sign Coalition. It's because quite often the first issue that you can take on in a low-income neighborhood is getting a stop sign at a busy intersection. Because when there are no stop signs or signals at busy intersections, what happens is that children crossing the street or elderly people crossing the street often end up being hit by cars and dying. So that can become easily an issue that is both broad and deep. It's also very tangible and very easy to win. So you get a stop sign and everyone is excited because fewer children and old people are dying. But then you step back and you reflect and you realize that even though fewer people are dying, there are still too many people dying. And you say, well, why? Why are too many people dying? Well, it's because there's a lot of drunk drivers in our community and they ignore the stop sign. So then you have to begin to say, well, why are there a lot of drunk drivers in our community? And you have to listen and you have to research and you have to reflect. And you realize that it's because there's a lot of self-destructive behavior among youth. And so maybe the next step is that you begin to organize youth specifically and to listen to youth and to pull together some activities for youth. But then in the process of building that relationship, what you begin to learn is that there's not enough jobs, that youth are often self-destructive when they don't have hope. So there's not enough job possibilities. And then you ask, why are there not enough job possibilities? And you realize that a number of youth who have engaged in some kind of self-destructive activity, or they've been part of a gang even for just self-protection, now have a record. They've been to jail. And that it's very, very hard when people have a record to get a job. So then you realize that it's possible, and here we go using John McKnight to level 3, right? What is a resource that is outside of the community, controlled by people outside of the community, but it really can impact the lives of people in the community, and so you need to figure out how you relate to it. So you could realize that cities hire a lot of people. That's a public investment question, right? So you end up with a policy that actually has been fought for by faith and action coalitions across the country, which is that you ask cities to give preferential hiring to people who have criminal records. Now, of course, they don't give preferential hiring to all people who have criminal records. There's a whole process for determining when somebody would be a good employee, even though they have a criminal record. But because you give people actually preference in hiring to people who have criminal records but who meet these other conditions, you give them a second chance. So you've actually you've been looking at the problem of too many people being hit by cars on the street, too many vulnerable people, young people and elderly people. And now you've done this reflection action process where you keep going deeper, closer to the root cause, and you keep being more able to impact the root cause, and you keep coming up with more and more effective solutions. And in the process, people's commitment, capacity, and connection are increasing, and they are getting closer to a community that is characterized by shalom.